On to the front benches, 10 minutes each. Monica Harding.
Thank you, Chair. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I am pleased to be at this debate to discuss these two very important petitions, and I want to thank my honourable friend, the member for South Cotswolds, for moving this debate. The Liberal Democrats have been calling for an immediate bilateral ceasefire since November 2023, one which will put an end to the humanitarian devastation in Gaza, get the hostages out and provide an opportunity for a political process towards a two-state solution based on the 1967 borders. A lasting peace and two states is the only way to guarantee the dignity and security which both the Palestinians and Israelis deserve. So, speaking in relation to the first petition, which calls for the UK to recognise the State of Palestine, I can proudly say that this is something the Liberal Democrats have long been calling for, and we support immediate recognition of the State of Palestine. UK allies have increasingly been recognising the State of Palestine, and the UK should join them, with the hope of refocusing attention on efforts to find a political solution to the war in the Middle East. Recognition of Palestine is particularly important right now, given the threats of some in Israel that have been noted by the ICC and the ICJ, like that of Minister Smotrich, seeking to annex the West Bank. I recently visited the occupied Palestinian territories in November and saw firsthand the expanding settlements and growing violence there. Recognising Palestine on 1967 lines would make clear where the United Kingdom stands in relation to this. As my honourable friend, the member for South Cotswolds, pointed out, recognising Palestine is a tool which will inject hope into Palestinian society that having their own state is possible. They are far from hope just now, and it is essential that we signal that we support statehood for them. I believe it will help wrest control back from the extremes at the edges of Palestinian society. This, as has been pointed out, is not a byproduct of a solution. It is the route to a solution. And it must be stated that Hamas can have no part in the governance of this Palestinian state.
Ayla Moran.
I'm extremely grateful to her for giving way, and she's entirely right that within Palestine this is seen as a prerequisite for what might come next. It doesn't replace, it's not top-down, it's something that's deeply felt and in fact was promised to the Palestinian people when my great-grandfather was alive. But would she also recognise that alongside a state there needs to be viable democratic elections, and that would be made much easier if everyone in Palestine were allowed to vote in them, which is what stopped the last ones from happening. They weren't.
Monica Harding.
I support my honourable friend and pay tribute to the work she has done in this debate, and also agree with her. To turn now, then, to the second petition, to immediately revoking all licences for arms exports to Israel. I fully support this, and this is something my party has been calling the UK government to implement since April this year. Tougher controls of UK arms exports are vital to ensure that they are not used in potential human rights breaches, and I support the introduction of a presumption of denial for all governments listed in the FCDO Human Rights and Democracy report as human rights priorities. As a result, arms exports to Israel should be halted. I know that the Minister has long avoided responding to questions from colleagues of mine calling for clarity on the UK's position to seize all arms exports to Israel, so I hope that we will hear a clearer response from the Minister today. I'll give way.
That's one.
For giving way. And I would just like to point out that there are sometimes small actions that can take place that might help. I know that a number of my constituents were incredibly concerned about the fact that there was premises that were owned by my local council, and the council has actually relinquished its interest in the building that was occupied by a company that was perceived by our constituents to be administratively involved in supplying parts involved in the arms business. And I just wondered if you would recognise that, if she would recognise that.
Monica Harding.
I thank my honourable friend for her intervention, and I would like the Minister to note that members have spoken today about workers in the United Kingdom making these parts and their unease with it. As the Right Honourable Member for Birmingham Hodge Hill pointed out, the UK government has made a choice in its export of F-35 components, and that choice is not in line with its international commitments and obligations under international humanitarian law. As the Liberal Democrat spokesperson on international development, I must also use this opportunity to emphasise my deep concern regarding laws passed in Israel's Knesset banning UNRWA in a situation that couldn't be more desperate. As the Under-Secretary-General for Humanitarian Affairs and UN Emergency Relief Coordinator starkly warns, the entire population of North Gaza is at risk of dying. This move, if enacted, would lead to the deaths of innocent Palestinian civilians. UNRWA plays a critical role in distributing humanitarian aid within Gaza, and this move risks catastrophic consequences. As well as words of condemnation, I ask the Minister here today to set out the consequences for breaching international law and urge the government to consider sanctioning Ministers Ben-Gvir and Smotrich for their incitement of violence against Palestinians by illegal settlers. The government must continue to provide support to UNRWA to address the humanitarian crisis at hand, as well as ensuring that the recommendations of the Kelowna report are implemented as soon as possible. My last point is one that I hope the Minister agrees with and acts upon, is that increasing international development funding is a critical way in which the UK government can be tackling the humanitarian crises that are as a result of conflicts like this that are driving the cause of the petitions being debated today. As the Liberal Democrat spokesperson on international development, I must urge the UK government to strengthen the UK's aid and development response. Overseas aid spending is at its lowest in 17 years. Having been cut by a further £2 billion in this fiscal year by this government and lower than the last Conservative government, despite the Prime Minister previously promising to reset Britain's place in the world and return to our status as an international development and aid superpower. The UK's funding for health programmes and the Humanitarian Relief Reserve Fund, both of which have been cut, urgently need to be restored, so the UK can improve its response to conflict and support the victims of this devastating war in the Middle East. Not only were these programmes eroded in the years since UK ODA was cut from 0.7% of GNI to 0.58% by the Conservative government, but this government has slashed it again to 0.5%. The UK's United Kingdom support is needed more than ever, given global conflicts and humanitarian disasters, and so I call on the government to restore ODA assistance of 0.7% of GNI as soon as possible to reinstate the country's commitment to the world's poorest by ensuring that the UK is a global leader on aid and development. Chair, I will end where I started. The Liberal Democrats call for an immediate recognition of a Palestinian state, the return of the hostages, a halt to all arms exports to Israel, and every effort and pressure brought to bear by the government on Israel to get the humanitarian assistance in now.